The sky above Vareth Prime burned red with falling ships. Commander Xylith watched from the command center as another coalition vessel exploded in the upper atmosphere, its debris scattering like dying stars. His scaled hands gripped the edge of the tactical display, claws leaving small marks in the metal. 3 fleets lost, billions dead. And still the enemy came. The Krethak swarm had no mercy because they had no concept of mercy. They were hunger given form, a hive mind that consumed everything in its path. Planets, ships, stations, rarer, all became fuel for their endless expansion. The coalition had tried diplomacy first, as they always did. The swarm's only response was to consume the diplomats. Shields at 18%, reported one of the technicians, a young Varathai female whose voice shook with barely controlled fear. We have maybe 2 hours before they fail completely. Xylith looked around the command center. Everyone here knew what that meant. When the shields fell, the swarm would descend on Vareth Prime like locusts. There would be no escape, no surrender, no survival. Just consumption. Send another pulse on all frequencies, he ordered. Someone out there has to hear us. Ambassador Kelrin stood near the communication station, his large eyes closed in concentration. The Mindari were telepathic, able to send thoughts across vast distances, but even Kelrin's powerful mind couldn't reach far enough. Every psychic pulse he sent into the void returned empty, echoing back with the psychic equivalent of screaming silence. Nothing, Kelrin said quietly. The nearest coalition systems have already fallen or are too far to help. We are alone. Xylith had known this for days, but hearing it spoken aloud made it real in a way that hurt. The Galactic Coalition had stood for 3,000 years, 12 species bound together in peace and prosperity. In less than 6 months, the swarm had reduced it to this one dying world, making desperate calls into an empty universe. Outside, the planetary defense cannons fired constantly, their beams lighting up the darkening sky. Each shot took down a swarm fighter or damaged a bioship, but for every enemy destroyed, 10 more took its place. The swarm didn't care about losses. Individual units meant nothing to a hive mind. Only the collective mattered. Sir, we're detecting breaches in Sectors 7 and 12, Sir, another officer reported. The swarm is landing ground forces. Deploy all remaining military units, Xylith commanded. Evacuate civilians to the underground shelters. He knew it was pointless. The shelters might buy them days at most. The swarm would dig through solid rock to reach fresh biomass. But soldiers gave orders and civilians followed them because the alternative was chaos, and chaos was a worse way to die. Kelrin approached him, placing a thin hand on Xylith's shoulder. The touch carried a wave of calm that only telepaths could provide, a brief respite from the fear clawing at his mind. You have done everything possible, Kelrin said. No one could have done more. Everything except win, Xylith replied bitterly. Everything except save our people. The building shook as something massive struck the shields. The lights flickered. Somewhere in the city below, people were screaming. Xylith had been a soldier for 40 years, had fought in the border conflicts and the pirate wars, but nothing had prepared him for this. How did you fight an enemy that felt no fear, needed no supply lines, and learned from every encounter? The coalition's weapons had been designed for defense, for precision strikes that minimized casualties. Their ships were built for exploration and peaceful trade. Their soldiers trained for peacekeeping, not warfare. Against a conventional enemy, these would have been advantages. Against the swarm, they were fatal weaknesses. Shields at 12%, the technician announced. Her voice had gone flat now, shock setting in. Estimate 45 minutes until total failure. Xylith pulled up the tactical display, looking at the disposition of forces. 6 defense platforms still operational, but running low on ammunition. 14 fighter squadrons in the air, but most were damaged and running on emergency power. Ground forces scattered across the planet, fighting desperate holding actions. And in orbit, the swarm fleet positioned itself like a noose tightening slowly. Sir, we're receiving something strange, the communications officer said suddenly. It's not a coalition frequency. I don't know what it is. Kelrin's eyes snapped open. I feel something, minds, many minds. But they're different, not coalition species. Put it through, Xylith ordered, not daring to hope. Static filled the command center. Then a voice out, speaking in coalition standard with a strange, rough accent that no one recognized. This is Captain Jake Morrison of the United Nations Space Navy, commanding the UNS Valkyrie. We received your distress call. We're entering the system now. Hold your position. Help is coming. Silence fell over the command center. Everyone stared at the communications console as if it had spoken in an ancient, dead language. United Nations? No one had heard that designation before. Space Navy? The words were coalition standard, but the combination made no sense. Who are they? Someone whispered. Humans, Kelvin breathed, his eyes wide. The species from the outer spiral arm. But that's impossible. They only achieved faster than light travel 5 years ago. They shouldn't have military vessels. They shouldn't even know where we are. Xylith activated his console, pulling up every scrap of data the coalition had on humanity. It wasn't much. First contact had been peaceful but brief a single human exploration ship, making careful diplomatic overtures. The coalition had noted them as a young spacefaring species, primitive but promising, potential candidates for coalition membership in a few decades. Nothing in the report suggested they had a space navy. Nothing suggested they could project military force across interstellar distances. And definitely nothing suggested they could help against the swarm. Respond, Xylith said, though his mind raced with questions. Tell them our situation. Coordinates, enemy strength, everything. As the communications officer worked, Kelrin closed his eyes again. I sense them now. So many minds. They're afraid, but there's something else. Determination, anger, and underneath it all a kind of stubbornness, like stone refusing to break. Shields at 8%, the technician reported. Then, looking at her sensors, she gasped. Sir, multiple jump signatures detected. Unknown vessels entering the system. Dozens of them. The tactical display updated, showing new contacts appearing at the system's edge. Ships unlike anything in coalition databases. Angular, brutal-looking things covered in weapons. They moved with purpose, accelerating hard toward Verith Prime. And then something impossible happened. The swarm ships closest to the newcomers simply died. One moment they were active, maneuvering, firing. The next they went dark and began drifting. No explosions, no visible damage. Just death. What did they do? Xylith demanded, staring at the display. More swarm ships died. Then more. The hive mind, which had coordinated perfectly for months, suddenly fragmented. Ships began firing on each other. Biofighters crashed into their own capital vessels. The noose around Verith Prime loosened as confusion spread through the swarm fleet. Electromagnetic pulse, Kelrin said, his telepathic senses reading something the sensors couldn't. They're disrupting the swarm's neural connections, breaking the hive link. That's not possible, the weapons officer said. We tried that. The swarm adapts too quickly. Apparently not quickly enough, Xylith replied, watching as the human fleet cut through the swarm forces like a blade through soft tissue. The lead human ship, this Valkyrie, broadcast again. Coalition forces, this is Captain Morrison. We're clearing your orbital space. Stand by for combat landing of Marine forces. We'll handle the ground elements. Combat landing? Xylith repeated. Onto a planet under active invasion? They're insane, someone muttered. Kelrin shook his head slowly. No, they're warriors. We forgot what that word truly means. On the tactical display, smaller craft launched from the human ship's OW dropships of some kind. They descended through the atmosphere at speeds that should have torn them apart, diving straight into the heaviest swarm concentrations. Point defense systems on the human ships provided covering fire, walking lines of destruction across the battlefield. Xylith opened a channel. Captain Morrison, this is Commander Xylith. Your arrival is unexpected. Can you really help us? Commander, we've been tracking the swarm for 3 years. Morrison's voice came back. Built this fleet specifically to fight them. We've got weapons, tactics, and a whole lot of humans who really don't like things that eat planets. So yeah, we can help, but we need your forces to coordinate with ours. Can you do that? Yes, Xylith said without hesitation. Pride could wait. Survival couldn't. Good. Transmitting tactical data now. We're going to push these things back to whatever hole they crawled out of. The command center's displays updated with human tactical information. Xylith stared at it, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. The humans had identified weaknesses in swarm biology that coalition scientists had missed. They'd developed weapons that targeted the hive mind's neural structures. They'd created strategies that assumed massive casualties and kept fighting anyway. This wasn't peacekeeping. This was war. Real, brutal, efficient war. Sir, the shields are stabilizing. The technician reported, disbelief in her voice. The swarm is pulling back from our position. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UNS Valkyrie. watching the Coalition Command Center on the main screen. Commander Xylith looked exhausted, his scales dulled by stress and lack of sleep. Behind him, other Coalition officers moved with the careful precision of people who'd just survived something they thought would kill them. Jake understood that feeling. He'd worn it himself more times than he wanted to remember. "Commander, thank you for agreeing to meet," Jake said. "I know you've got a lot on your plate right now." "Captain Morrison, you saved my world and my people," Xylith replied. "Meeting with you is the least I can do, though I admit I have questions. Many questions. I bet you do." Jake gestured to someone off-screen. "Let me introduce my tactical officer, Lieutenant Amy Walsh. She'll walk you through how we found you and what we know about the swarm." Amy stepped into view, a tablet in her hands. She was young for her rank, barely 30, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. She'd spent 2 years analyzing swarm behavior, had written 3 papers on hive mind vulnerabilities, and could discuss alien biology for hours without getting bored. Jake had handpicked her for this mission. "Commander Ambassador," Amy began, nodding to both Xylith and Kelrin. "5 years ago, we picked up your first distress calls about the swarm. Took us a while to translate and understand what we were hearing. But once we did, Earth's government made a decision. This thing was an extinction-level threat not just to you, but potentially to us. So we started preparing." She pulled up data on the shared screen of world charts, graphs, biological scans. "We studied every transmission, every sensor echo we could find, built models of swarm behavior, dissected dead swarm tissue from a destroyed fighter that drifted into our scanning range. And we learned." Xylith leaned forward. "In 5 years, you learned what we couldn't in months of direct combat." "We had an advantage," Jake said quietly. "We've been fighting wars for our entire history. Humanity's really good at killing things that threaten us. It's not something we're proud of, but it's useful when something like the swarm shows up." Kelrin spoke for the first time. "I sensed this in your soldiers' minds. You all carry the weight of violence. How do you live with it?" "Not well sometimes," Jake admitted. "But we live with it because the alternative is worse. If we don't fight, innocent people die. So we fight and we deal with the nightmares later." Amy continued her briefing. "The swarm's hive mind operates on a biological neural network. Individual units communicate through electromagnetic pulses in a very specific frequency range. We designed weapons to disrupt those frequencies. It doesn't kill them immediately, but it breaks their coordination. Once they're separated from the hive, they're just confused animals. We tried electromagnetic warfare," one of Xylith's officers interjected. "The swarm adapted within hours." "You tried broad-spectrum jamming," Amy corrected gently. "We're targeting specific neural pathways. The swarm can't adapt without changing its fundamental biology, which would take generations, not hours. We've got a window to hurt them badly before they figure out a counter." Jake watched Xylith process this. The Coalition thought in terms of defense, protection, minimal casualties. They'd tried to fight the swarm like it was a political problem that could be resolved through superior technology and clever tactics. They hadn't understood that some threats required old-fashioned violence. "There's more," Jake said. "The swarm isn't just expanding randomly. They're following a pattern, moving towards something. We think there's a central hive somewhere, maybe even a queen or core intelligence. If we can find it and kill it, we might stop the whole swarm." "Kill it," Xylith repeated slowly. "You speak of destroying an entire species so casually." "No, sir, I don't," Jake replied, and his voice hardened. "I speak of it with full understanding of what it means. The swarm has killed billions of your people. They'll kill billions more if we don't stop them. I don't like it. Nobody on my crew likes it. But liking something doesn't matter when it needs to be done." Silence filled the channel. Finally, Kelrin spoke. "You are very different from us, Captain. We evolved beyond violence long ago. We thought it made us civilized." "Maybe it did," Amy said. "But civilization's only worth something if you can defend it. Otherwise, you're just waiting for something meaner to come along and take it from you." Xylith stood up from his chair. "I need to consult with the Coalition Council. Your methods are concerning, but your results speak for themselves. How many ships do you have?" "In this fleet?" 43 combat vessels," Jake said. "Smaller than what we'd like, but it's what we could build in 5 years while keeping it secret. Earth's government didn't want to cause panic by announcing we were building a war fleet to fight an alien invasion that most people didn't know about." 43 ships, Xylith said quietly. "We had 300 before the swarm came. Less than half remain. And you defeated a swarm fleet with fewer than 50 vessels. Different doctrine, Jake explained. Coalition ships are built for multiple roles: aero exploration, trade, defense. Ours are built for one thing: combat. Every weapon, every system, every plate of armor exists to kill the enemy before they kill us. They're not pretty, they're not elegant, but they work. I saw your Marines fight on the surface, Xylith said. They took heavy casualties. Jake's expression didn't change, but Amy saw his hands tighten on the armrest of his chair. 23 dead, 47 wounded. I've got their names memorized. I'll write letters to their families tonight. But those 23 saved millions of your people, Commander. They knew the risks. They went anyway. We don't have soldiers who would do such a thing, Kelrin said. Not anymore. Is this what we must become to survive? No, Amy said firmly. You don't need to become like us. You need to work with us. Your technology, our tactics. Your ethics, our experience. Together maybe we can stop the swarm without either side losing what makes them who they are. Jake nodded. Lieutenant Walsh is right. We're offering an alliance, not a takeover. You keep being you. We'll handle the ugly parts of war because we're already good at them, but we need your help too. Your sensors are better than ours. Your medical technology is decades ahead. Your understanding of this region of space is way beyond what we have. A partnership, Xylith said thoughtfully. A partnership, Jake confirmed. Look, I get that we're scary. We showed up with warships and killed a bunch of things in your orbit. That's not how the Coalition usually does first contact. But the swarm doesn't care about protocols or diplomatic niceties. They care about eating. So we need to speak their language, which is violence, while you maintain the moral center that reminds us why we're fighting in the first place. A junior officer approached Xylith, whispering urgently. The commander's face darkened. Captain, we're receiving reports. The swarm is attacking Thelian 4. That's where we build our ships. If it falls, how long until they arrive there? Jake interrupted. Our analysts estimate 72 hours. Jake looked at Amy, who was already pulling up star charts. We can reach it in 60 hours if we push the engines hard. Commander, transmit everything you have on Thelian 4 Baru, defenses, layout, population, everything. We're going to save your shipyard. You just fought a major battle, Xylith protested. Your ships need repairs, your crew needs rest. The swarm doesn't rest, Jake said simply. Neither can we. Get us that data and coordinate with your forces there. We'll put together a battle plan en route. After the channel closed, Amy sat down heavily. You know the fleet's running on fumes, right? We burned through 40% of our ammunition at Varith Prime. Engineering reports stress fractures in the Valkyrie's primary reactor housing. And the crew hasn't slept more than 4 hours in the last 2 days. I know, Jake said quietly. But Thelian 4 is their last shipyard. If they lose it, they can't rebuild their fleet. The swarm will roll over every Coalition world one by one, and we don't have enough ships to stop that. We need the Coalition's industrial capacity, so we're going to save it even if it kills us. That's the job, Lieutenant. Amy pulled up the tactical data on Thelian 4. It wasn't good. The shipyard orbited a gas giant, protected by defense platforms and a small fleet. Against a conventional attack, it would be nearly impregnable. Against the swarm, those defenses might buy a few hours at most. We can't win a straight fight, she said after a moment.
Even if we had full ammunition and fresh ships, the swarm will throw everything at this target.
We'll be outnumbered 10-1 at minimum. Then we don't fight straight, Jake replied. We fight dirty. We fight smart. We fight human. Over the next 2 days, Jake and Amy worked with Coalition officers to develop a battle plan. It was desperate, brutal, and had a dozen points where everything could go catastrophically wrong. It also had about a 30% chance of working, which was better odds than doing nothing. The plan required using the human fleet as bait, drawing the swarm into a killing zone, then detonating the shipyard itself in a massive explosion that would take out the swarm fleet. It meant sacrificing the Coalition's last chance to build ships. It meant accepting massive casualties. It meant trusting that victory was worth the price. When Jake presented it to the Coalition Council, the reaction was exactly what he expected. Horror. The briefing room on the UNS Valkyrie felt cramped with both human and Coalition officers packed inside. Sergeant Danny Cruz stood near the back, watching Captain Morrison outline the plan for Thelian 4. Danny had been a Marine for 12 years, had seen combat on 3 different worlds, and recognized a suicide mission when he heard one. The plan was simple in concept, horrific in execution. The human fleet would engage the swarm, drawing them toward the shipyard. A small team of Marines would hold the detonation point inside the facility until the swarm fleet moved into position. Then, at the right moment, the entire shipyard would explode, taking out a significant portion of the swarm's forces. The team at the detonation point wouldn't be evacuated. There wouldn't be time. Danny glanced around the room. Other Marines wore the same expression he probably had, grim acceptance. They'd all known what they were signing up for when they joined this mission. Earth was a long way from the swarm now, but the brass figured if the coalition fell, humanity would be next. Better to fight the swarm here with allies than alone later. After the briefing, officers dispersed to their duties. Danny found himself in the mess hall with Lieutenant Amy Walsh, who was reviewing technical specifications for the shipyard's reactor systems. She looked up when he sat down across from her. "Sergeant Cruz, how are the troops?" "Ready, ma'am. Maybe a little nervous, but that's normal before something like this." Amy set down her tablet. "Can I ask you something?" "Off the record." "Sure. How do you cope with it? Knowing you might die doing this?" Danny thought about it for a moment. "Honestly, I don't think about dying. I think about the job, about the people I'm protecting. My squad, the coalition civilians, the folks back on Earth who don't even know we're out here. If I die making sure they're safe, that's not a bad way to go. But doesn't it scare you?" "Hell yes, it scares me," Danny admitted with a slight smile. "I'm not crazy, but being scared doesn't mean you stop. It just means you decide that something matters more than the fear." Amy was quiet for a moment. "The coalition doesn't understand that. They think we're either brave or insane. Maybe we're both." Danny stood up. "But at least we're both in a way that saves lives. That's got to count for something." The fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Thelian system. Immediately, sensors lit up with swarm contacts. Lots of them. More than the estimates predicted. On the bridge, Jake studied the tactical display with a sinking feeling. "Amy, how many?" "At least 200 swarm ships," she replied quietly. "They committed everything to this attack. They know how valuable this target is." Jake keyed the fleet-wide channel. "All ships, this is Morrison. I won't lie to you, we're outnumbered badly, but we've got better weapons, better tactics, and we're fighting for something that matters. Those coalition people are counting on us. Let's not let them down. Morrison out." He switched to a private channel with Danny's unit. "Sergeant Cruz, you ready?" "As we'll ever be, sir. Just get us to that shipyard." "Copy that." "Godspeed, Sergeant." The battle began badly and got worse. Swarm ships swarmed the human fleet like angry insects, their bioweapons tearing into hulls despite point defense fire. The human ships gave as good as they got, their disruption weapons fragmenting swarm coordination. But the numbers were overwhelming. Jake ordered the fleet into a fighting retreat toward the shipyard. It was a careful dancer move too fast and the swarm might disengage. Too slow and the fleet would be destroyed before the plan could work. Ships took damage, crews died, and still they pressed on. Danny's dropship launched from the Valkyrie along with 5 others, racing toward the shipyard through a storm of weapons fire. Inside, 20 human Marines and 15 coalition volunteers sat in tense silence. The coalition soldiers were young, civilians who'd volunteered for military service after watching the humans fight at Verath Prime. Danny had trained them as best he could in 2 days, but training couldn't prepare anyone for real combat. One of them, a Mindari engineer named Sethis, sat next to Danny with wide, terrified eyes. The kid couldn't have been more than 20 in human years. "Sergeant," Sethis said quietly. "I'm afraid?" "Good," Danny replied. "Fear keeps you alive. Just remember your training and stick with your team. We'll get through this." "How can you be so calm?" Danny checked his rifle's charge for the 3rd time. "I'm not calm, kid. I'm just experienced at being scared. There's a difference." The dropship shuddered as it entered the shipyard's docking bay. Before it fully stopped, Danny was on his feet, weapon ready. "Everyone out. Move, move, move!" They piled into the shipyard's corridors, moving quickly toward the primary reactor control room. Coalition workers were still evacuating, flooding past in the opposite direction. Some of them stared at the soldiers with expressions mixing gratitude and pity. They knew what the Marines were here to do. The reactor control room was 3 levels down, protected by redundant security doors and shielding. Danny's team reached it with 20 minutes to spare before the swarm fleet moved into optimal detonation range. They set up defensive positions and began preparing the explosives that would overload the reactors. Amy's voice crackled over the comms. Sergeant Cruz, we're reading massive swarm landing parties heading your way. They know someone's in there. How long until detonation? 18 minutes. Can you hold? Danny looked at his defensive positions, counted his ammunition, and did the math in his head. Yeah, we can hold. Just make sure the fireworks are worth it. The swarm came 10 minutes later. They poured into the corridor like a living flood of insect-like warriors with blade limbs and acid spit. Coordinated by the hive mind into perfect killing formations, Danny's team opened fire, cutting down the first wave, but more kept coming. The noise was deafening. Gunfire explosions, the shriek of dying swarm warriors, and the screams of wounded Marines. Danny moved through the chaos like he'd been trained, firing controlled bursts, calling out targets, pulling wounded soldiers back from the line. Sethis fought beside him. The young Mindari's fear transformed into desperate courage. When his weapon's power pack ran dry, he picked up a human rifle and kept firing. When a swarm warrior broke through the line and charged him, Sethis didn't freeze and he swung the rifle like a club, buying time for another Marine to take the shot. 8 minutes, Amy's voice announced over comms. Swarm fleet is moving into position. A massive explosion rocked the corridor. The swarm had brought heavy weapons. Danny's defensive line collapsed, forcing them back into the reactor control room itself. He did a quick head count. 9 Marines dead, 5 coalition volunteers, more wounded, and the swarm kept coming. Seal the door, Danny ordered. Buy us time. They welded the entrance shut with plasma torches, but it wouldn't hold long. Already acid was eating through the metal. Through the weakening door, Danny could hear the swarm massing for a final assault. 5 minutes, Amy said, and her voice cracked slightly. Danny, we're going to detonate early if we have to. If your position is overrun. Negative, Danny interrupted. We hold for the full time. Every second we buy might be another swarm ship in the blast radius. Danya. We're not arguing about this, Lieutenant. You do your job, we'll do ours. Jake's voice came over the channel.
Sergeant Cruz, this is Morrison.
I want you to know, sir, with respect, save the speech, Danny said. We all knew what we signed up for. Just make it count. The door exploded inward. Swarm warriors poured through the gap like nightmares made flesh. Danny's team opened fire at point-blank range, turning the control room into a slaughterhouse. Marines fought with guns until the ammunition ran out, then with knives, then with their bare hands. Sethis went down, a swarm blade through his chest. Danny pulled him back, but the kid was already dying. His large eyes found Danny's face. Did we do enough? Sethis gasped. Yeah, kid. You did great. You're a hero. Sethis smiled weakly and died. Danny stood up, firing his sidearm into the mass of swarm warriors. Around him, the last Marines were being overwhelmed. The detonator console was still intact, protected by their bodies and sacrifice. 3 minutes, Amy's voice said, barely audible over the fighting. Danny fought his way to the console, taking wounds he barely felt. A swarm warrior grabbed him from behind, its blades piercing his side. He twisted, broke free, and shot it at point-blank range. Another warrior charged. He dodged, letting it slam into the console instead and put 3 rounds into its head. 2 minutes. Only Danny was still alive now, standing alone in a room full of the dead, his blood mixed with theirs on the floor. The swarm circled him, dozens of warriors evaluating this last human who refused to fall. On the bridge of the Valkyrie, Jake watched the tactical display with tears streaming down his face. The swarm fleet was in perfect position. Every second Danny bought meant more enemies in the blast radius, but every second also meant watching a good man die alone. 1 minute, Amy whispered. Danny braced himself against the console, his rifle empty, his sidearm lost somewhere in the fighting. The swarm warriors tensed, ready to finish him. He looked at the countdown timer on the console and smiled despite the pain. Come on then, he said to the swarm. Let's see what you've got. They charged. Danny met them with a combat knife in each hand, buying seconds with his life. He thought about Earth, about his family who'd... 3 weeks after the Battle of Thelion 4, Ambassador Kelrin stood in the memorial garden on Varith Prime, looking at the new monument. It was a simple structure, built from stone quarried from Earth and shaped by coalition artisans, a blend of both cultures. Like everything else had become since humanity arrived, the names were carved deep into the stone. Danny Cruz, Sethis, all the others who'd died holding that detonation point, human and coalition names mixed together, united by sacrifice. They died as one, Kelrin said quietly to Commander Xylith, who stood beside him. Human and coalition, fighting for the same cause. I felt their minds in those final moments. There was fear, yes, but also purpose. They knew they mattered. Xylith touched one of the names with his scaled hand. Sergeant Cruz saved millions of lives. Him and his team. We owe them everything. We owe all of them, Kelrin corrected. The living carry the weight of the dead now. Captain Morrison especially. In the command center nearby, Jake Morrison reviewed defensive positions with Amy Walsh and coalition officers. The joint military coordination had become more efficient over the past weeks, though cultural differences still caused friction. The coalition officers were learning human tactical doctrine, while the humans were learning coalition sensor technology and medical practices. We've established defensive perimeters around 12 major coalition worlds, Amy explained, highlighting systems on the star chart. The swarm is still out there, but they're more cautious now. We hurt them badly at Thelion 4. They're regrouping, Jake said, planning their next move. We need to do the same. A young coalition officer, a Verithai named Corvin, spoke up hesitantly. Captain Morrison, may I ask a question? Go ahead. Your people have lost many soldiers in these battles, yet you continue fighting. How do you maintain morale when the costs are so high? Jake was quiet for a moment. We remember why we're fighting. We honor the dead by making sure their sacrifice meant something. And we keep putting one foot in front of the other because somebody has to. But the psychological toll is real, Jake admitted. Every human in this fleet will carry scars from this war. Some physical, most mental. We'll deal with that when we can. Right now, we deal with the swarm. Corvin seemed troubled by this answer but nodded. The coalition was still struggling to understand human psychology, the ability to compartmentalize trauma, to keep functioning under conditions that would break most coalition species. To them it seemed both admirable and deeply concerning. Later that day, Jake found himself alone in his quarters, staring at a stack of letters he'd written to families back on Earth. 78 letters. Each one trying to explain why someone's son or daughter, husband or wife wasn't coming home. He'd spent hours on each one, knowing the words would never be enough. A message came through his personal comm. It was from Amy. Captain, you should see this. We've got coalition volunteers requesting transfer to human military units. A lot of them. Jake made his way to Amy's office, where she showed him the transfer requests. Hundreds of coalition civilians, inspired by what they'd seen humans do, wanted to serve. They wanted to learn to fight the way humans fought. What do you think? Amy asked. I think they don't understand what they're asking for, Jake said slowly. Combat isn't glorious. It's not heroic. It's ugly and traumatic, and it changes you in ways you can't undo. Should we refuse them? Jake looked at the requests, seeing Sethis in every name. The young Mindari had volunteered knowing the risks. He'd died buying seconds that saved millions. Who was Jake to tell other coalition citizens they couldn't make that same choice? No, he decided. But we make sure they know what they're getting into. Full disclosure about the psychological costs, the trauma, all of it. If they still want to serve after that, we train them properly. The training program began the next week. Human Marines worked with coalition volunteers, teaching them not just tactics but the mindset required for combat. It wasn't easy. The coalition species had evolved past aggression, and asking them to relearn violence went against millennia of cultural development. But they tried. They tried because they'd seen their worlds burning and understood that sometimes survival required doing things that contradicted your nature. One evening, Jake was observing a training session when Kelrin approached him. The Mindari ambassador had been spending more time studying human psychology, trying to understand the species that had saved the coalition. May I speak with you, Captain? Kelrin asked. Of course. They walked to a quiet observation deck overlooking Verith Prime's recovering cities. Lights were coming back on across the planet as infrastructure was rebuilt. Life continued, purchased with blood. I've been touching the minds of your soldiers, Kelrin said. With their permission, of course. What I've found troubles me deeply. What did you find? Pain, terrible, constant pain. Not physical, worse. The weight of memories, of decisions, of losses. Your Lieutenant Walsh carries guilt over every casualty projection that proved accurate. Your Marines remember every friend they lost. And you, Captain. You carry all of them. Every death, every sacrifice, every impossible choice. It's crushing you. Jake was quiet for a long moment. Yeah, it is. How do you function? I don't know sometimes, Jake admitted. You just do. Because people are counting on you. Because if you break, others suffer. So you hold it together and hope you can deal with the damage later. That seems unbearably cruel. It is. But it's also necessary. Someone has to make the hard calls, Kelrin. Someone has to carry the weight. If it destroys us in the process, Jake shrugged. That's the price of command. Kelrin placed a hand on Jake's shoulder, sharing some of his calm through telepathic contact. Your species is remarkable and terrifying in equal measure. You willingly damage yourselves to protect others. I'm not sure whether that's the highest form of courage or the deepest form of tragedy. Maybe it's both. The conversation was interrupted by an urgent communication from Amy. Captain, we've got a situation. Long-range sensors are detecting massive swarm movements. They're gathering in the outer reaches. Looks like they're preparing for something big. Jake's moment of vulnerability ended, replaced by the mask of command he wore so well. On my way. Kelrin, I need you to gather the Coalition Council. We need to talk strategy. An hour later, human and Coalition leadership assembled in the command center. The sensor data was clear and terrifying. The swarm was massing forces unlike anything they'd seen before. Thousands of ships, maybe tens of thousands, gathering in deep space. They're preparing a final offensive, Amy said, her voice tight with tension. If this force hits any Coalition world, we won't be able to stop it. We need to know their target, Xylith said. If we can predict where they'll strike We can't just wait for them to attack, Jake interrupted. That's reactive thinking. We need to take the fight to them. Captain Morrison, we barely survived Thelian 4. One of the Coalition counselors protested. You're suggesting we attack a force that outnumbers us catastrophically. I'm suggesting we find their central hive and kill it, Jake replied. The swarm is coordinated by some kind of central intelligence. Take that out and the whole thing collapses. Amy's been analyzing swarm movement patterns for weeks. She thinks she's found it. Amy pulled up a star chart highlighting a system deep in what had been swarm-controlled space. This system keeps appearing in their coordination patterns. Ships staging through it, resources flowing toward it. I think the Hive Queen or Core Intelligence or whatever you want to call it is located here. That's a fortress system, Xylith said, studying the data. Getting there would require penetrating through swarm territory, fighting through their home fleet. Even if we reached it, we'd be too depleted to win the battle that mattered. Unless we don't fight through, Jake said. Unless we go around. Hit them where they're not expecting it. He outlined a plan that made the Thelian 4 operation look conservative by comparison. A small strike force would use captured swarm biosignatures to mask their approach, slip through the outer defenses, and strike directly at the hive. Meanwhile, the main fleet would create a diversion, drawing swarm forces away from the target. It was insane. It would require perfect timing, incredible luck, and accepting that most of the strike force probably wouldn't survive. But if it worked, it could end the war. You're asking us to bet everything on one desperate attack, the counselor said. I'm asking you to trust that sometimes the desperate move is the right move, Jake replied. The swarm is gathering for their final push. We either hit them first or we wait for them to roll over us. I'd rather die fighting than wait for the end. The debate raged for hours. Coalition culture resisted such aggressive tactics, but they'd learned hard lessons about survival over the past months. Finally, with significant reservations, they approved the operation. As the meeting broke up, Kelrin pulled Jake aside. This will cost many lives, human and Coalition both. I know, and you'll carry that weight too. I know, Jake repeated. But if we win, if we end this war, maybe the wait will be worth it. Maybe the dead will rest easier knowing their sacrifice brought peace. Kelrin looked at him with those large, sad eyes. You truly believe that? I have to, Jake said quietly. Because if I don't, if I let myself think about... The strike force emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of the target system. Their ships coated with biological matter harvested from dead swarm vessels. To any swarm sensors, they would appear as just another group of hive ships returning home. It was a disguise that would only work until they got close. But close was all they needed. Lieutenant Amy Walsh sat in the command chair of the lead strike ship, her hands steady despite her racing heart. Behind her, a mixed crew of humans and Coalition officers monitored their approach. They'd trained together for 2 weeks, learning each other's languages and methods, building trust that would be tested in the next few hours. Swarm patrol ships ahead, reported a Verithai sensor officer. They're scanning us, Hold steady, Amy ordered. Let the biosignature do its work. Seconds crawled by. The swarm ships moved closer, their organic hulls pulsing with bioluminescent patterns that served as communication. Amy barely breathed. If the disguise failed now, they'd be destroyed before getting anywhere near the hive. The swarm patrol ships passed by without incident, moving on to scan other vessels in the crowded system. Amy released a breath she hadn't known she was holding. "We're through the first layer," she said quietly. On to the next. Commander Xylith, commanding the coalition portion of the strike force from his own ship, opened a private channel. "Lieutenant Walsh, I wanted to say, if this goes wrong, it's been an honor serving with humans. The honor's been ours, Commander. But it's not going wrong. We've come too far to fail now." Across the system, the main human fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel in a blaze of energy signatures impossible to miss. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the Valkyrie, watching as thousands of swarm ships immediately turned toward them like a disturbed hive of angry insects. That got their attention. He said dryly, "All ships execute Plan Delta. Make them think we're here for a direct assault." The human fleet charged forward, weapons blazing, drawing the swarm's focus exactly where they wanted it. It was a deadly game and they needed to seem like a serious threat without actually engaging in a battle they couldn't win. Too aggressive and they'd be destroyed. Too cautious and the swarm wouldn't commit forces, leaving Amy's strike team exposed. Jake watched the tactical display, counting seconds. "Come on, Amy," he muttered. "Do your thing." Deep in the system, Amy's strike force approached the hive itself, a massive organic structure that might have been a ship, might have been a station, or might have been a living creature. It defied easy categorization. A pulsing mass of biological material the size of a small moon, surrounded by defensive structures and tended by thousands of smaller swarm vessels. "There," Amy said, pointing at the tactical display. "That's the neural nexus, the brain of the operation. If we can destroy that, the entire swarm collapses." "How do we get inside?" asked a human marine. "We drill," Amy replied. "Conventional explosives, then we go in on foot and plant charges at the core. It's going to get ugly." "When isn't it ugly?" the marine said with dark humor. The strike force broke off their disguise, weapons coming online, engines burning hot as they made their final approach. The swarm defenders reacted immediately. But the distraction was working. Most of their forces were engaged with Jake's fleet, leaving only a fraction to defend the hive. It was still more than enough to make things difficult. The battle around the hive was vicious and chaotic. Strike force ships weaved between defensive structures, taking fire from bioweapons that sought to disable rather than destroy a coup. The swarm wanted to capture and assimilate, which worked in the attacker's favor. A destroyed ship was a dead ship, but a disabled ship could still complete its mission. Amy's ship took heavy damage penetrating the outer defenses, hull breaches on 3 decks, life support failing, but they reached the surface of the hive, drilling arms extending, cutting into the organic material. The hive screamed, "Oh," an actual sound that transmitted through their hulls, making everyone's skin crawl. "Breach established," the pilot reported. "You've got a hole, but I don't know how long it'll stay open." Amy stood up, grabbing her weapon. "Then we better move fast. Strike team, with me." 20 humans and 15 coalition soldiers entered the hive through the breach, stepping into a nightmare. The interior was alive in ways that violated every expectation of what a ship should be. Walls pulsed with circulation systems. The air was thick and warm and smelled of things that shouldn't exist. Somewhere in the distance, something enormous was breathing. "Stay together," Amy ordered. "Watch your sectors. Anything moves, you shoot it." They moved through the organic corridors, following Amy's navigation. She'd studied the swarm's biological structure for months, understood how hive organisms organized themselves. The neural nexus would be at the center, protected by the bulk of the hive's mass. Swarm defenders appeared. Warriors bred for close combat in tight spaces. The fighting was brutal and immediate. Human weapons thundered in the confined space. Coalition energy weapons cut through organic material. And slowly, meter by meter, they pushed deeper. A human marine went down, torn apart by swarm blades. A Verathai soldier fell, acid burning through his armor. They couldn't stop to help, couldn't stop to mourn. They just kept moving because stopping meant dying and dying meant failure. Back in the outer system, Jake's fleet was taking heavy casualties. Ships burned and died, bought time with their crew's lives. He'd lost 8 vessels already, with more taking critical damage. But the swarm was committed now, throwing everything at them, which meant Amy's team was as safe as they could be. "Sir, we can't hold this much longer," his tactical officer reported. "We need to pull back." "Not yet," Jake said. "Give them every second we can." Deep in the hive, Amy's team reached the neural nexus aua chamber filled with pulsing neural tissue, the biological computer that controlled billions of swarm organisms across light years of space. It was beautiful in a terrible way, organic art on a massive scale. "Plant the charges," Amy ordered. "We've got 5 minutes to get out." Her team spread through the chamber, placing explosive devices at key neural junctions. The hive seemed to sense what they were doing. The walls began constricting, trying to crush them. "Swarm defenders poured into the chamber from every entrance. It knows," Xylith said over the comms. "The hive mind knows we're killing it." "Then let's make sure we finish the job," Amy replied, shooting a charging swarm warrior. The coalition soldiers formed a defensive line, holding the entrances while humans finished planting charges. They fought with everything they'd learned from their human teachers, and no longer civilized species playing at war, but soldiers who understood that survival sometimes required becoming the monster you feared. The last charge was placed. Amy activated the detonation sequence. 4 minutes. "Everyone out now?" They ran back through the hive's corridors, the entire structure convulsing around them. Warriors pursued them, but these weren't coordinated attacks anymore. The hive mind was fragmenting, neural connections breaking. The swarm was dying, and it was taking its last chance to kill those responsible. Amy's team reached the breach point with 90 seconds remaining. The ships were still there, barely. Engines screaming, damaged beyond any reasonable function, held together by determination and prayer. "Everyone on board," Amy shouted. "Go, go, go!" They piled into the ships. Amy did a quick head count. 12 humans made it. 8 coalition soldiers. 23 people had entered the hive. They'd lost 14. "Pilot, get us clear," she ordered. The ships pulled away from the hive, engines burning far beyond safe limits. Behind them, the countdown reached 0. The neural nexus exploded in a cascade of biological destruction. The hive's core imploded, neural tissue dying in waves that spread outward like ripples in dark water. The entire structure began tearing itself apart, unable to maintain coherence without its central intelligence. And across the system, across light years of space, every swarm ship went silent. The massive fleet attacking Jake's forces simply stopped. Ships drifted, their coordination gone, their purpose erased. Individual swarm organisms on those ships went dormant or died, unable to function without the hive's direction. On the Valkyrie's bridge, silence fell as everyone processed what they were seeing. "They're dead," the tactical officer whispered. "All of them. Every swarm ship in the system just died." Jake allowed himself to feel hope for the first time in months. "Get me Lieutenant Walsh. Amy, tell me you made it out." "We made it, Captain." Amy's voice came back, exhausted but alive. "Mission accomplished. The hive is destroyed." Jake closed his eyes briefly. "Good work, Lieutenant. Bring your people home. The battle was over. The war, after months of desperate fighting, had ended in a single strike that changed everything." 3 months later, the memorial garden on Vareth Prime had grown. More names carved in stone, more lives remembered. But now there was also something new, a statue of a human and a Varethi standing back to back, weapons ready, united in purpose. Captain Jake Morrison stood before it with Ambassador Kelron, looking at the names of all those lost. Danny Cruz, Sethis, the Marines and coalition soldiers who'd died in the hive, the ship crews who'd never come home. 247, Jake said quietly. "That's how many humans died in this war. I know all their names. Wrote letters to all their families. I